How's it, everybody? Welcome back to the Rocky Fern. My name is Luca and I have OI type 4, and in today's episode of Show Me the Green we're doing something really exciting. I'm going to show you my Platycerium collection and I'm going to do some repotting, and we'll kind of get into individual spotlights on each of the different varieties that I have. So let's get into it. So Platycerium, that's such a cool fern to have in your collection. It's such a beautiful plant. I believe there's 18 different species, and they range all over the world from the coastal eastern coast of Australia all the way up Java, Malaysia, the Philippines, into southern Asia, across into India, into Africa, and then there's one species that occurs in South America. So I have 8 different species of Platycerium in my collection, and I love them all. They're all so unique and very cool, and they range from super easy to take care of to, maybe a little bit more demanding in care. And so today, while I'm showing you the different varieties I have, some of them are in desperate needs of repot, and there's different ways that you can actually epiphytically hang these plants. So I'm a big proponent of what you can source locally, and so coconuts are very available here in Hawaii. So I'm going to be mounting several plants on coconut, and I'll go over kind of how we use the coconut here, or how I use the coconut here, and different methods that you can use that are from planks of wood to corrugated pieces of plastic. So Platycerium, they have 2 different types of fronds. They have fertile fronds, which are typically the staghorn portions of the plant, and certain patches of sore, S-O-R-E, or spore patches will develop on the plants. And being ferns, they produce via spores. They're not angiosperms, so they don't flower, and then you can actually get quite a huge amount of plants growing from spores, and they're actually pretty easy to do for the most part. But they also pup, which is awesome. So they also develop these shield fronds or basal fronds, and that's actually kind of what wraps around the base of the rhizome or the root mass, and also kind of adheres it to the tree or to the rock cliff that they're hanging to. And they serve different structures. So not only do the fertile fronds and the basal fronds look differently between the different species and cultivars, but they also can serve different purposes. So some of the fertile fronds on some of the Platycerium will grow into a funnel shape, and they actually capture debris, water, sometimes animals, carcasses, carrion, whatever, and acts as a really cool composting system for the plant. And really big Platycerium, and some of these guys can get up of several hundred pounds, can support its own unique ecosystem in the plant, in the rhizome and the crown of the plant. So it's kind of a very cool plant, especially to see one in nature would be amazing. So keeping that in mind, we're going to go over the different fertile fronds and basal fronds of each of the species that I have here, and kind of talk about the differences and the beauty that I find in these plants. So to start off, I think what we'll do is we will go with the easiest of the plants, the kind of the most common, and we'll kind of go up in rarity as I see it. So some of the most common Platycerium that you're going to get for sure is Platycerium bifurcatum. That is the staghorn fern, and there's a lot of subspecies related to this bifurcatum, or cousins of this bifurcatum, that kind of occur throughout. And I have 3 or 4 bifurcatum cousins in my collection, and they do occur in Australia, through the Philippines, even all the way up into Java, Malaysia. But as far as Platycerium bifurcatum goes, they can get really, really big. They do occur in kind of more of a higher humid area. I would say as a whole, Platycerium do like higher humidity and bright indirect light. Now, we do have some outliers here and there, but for the most part, they do like kind of bright indirect light, higher humidity, and epiphytic type planting medium. So when you're repotting your plants, sphagnum moss is really good. I'm not going to use straight sphagnum moss today. I'll go over my mix here in a little bit, but it's basically the moss pole mix. Something that is easily breathable, allows water to pass through quite frequently or quite easily, but also holds on to quite a bit of water. with still being airy for the roots. So my bifurcatum we got at a local nursery with my son Graham, and it was a rescue plant. The guy was like, here, I'll give it to you for like $6. And it has since shot off three or four different pups. But I originally, it's this guy right here, I originally put it in a half coconut husk. So that's use number one, is to use the hard shell of the coconut as a kind of a mold or a base. And then you put your medium on in the front and kind of mount it over it so it's a circular shape, or spherical shape rather. And then the plant will start to grow around that. So, and I should note, this may not be bifurcatum. This could be super bum, but I'm pretty sure it's bifurcatum. These are the fertile fronds, and they're really pretty veined. You can kind of see that right here. It's a really pretty plant. And then down here, these brown leaves, these are the basal or the shield fronds. And you can see they actually adhere to the shape of whatever it's growing on and kind of keep it tucked in. And you'll get debris and stuff stuck between each of the leaves, and as a new basal frond comes out, it kind of hides everything and protects it in there. And eventually what you can do, these are two separate plants, you can actually just cut this one away and cut this one away, and you'll have two different plants. Now they are clones, but you'll have two different plants that you can you know, spread around. And actually looking at it, there's three different plants just right in here, and there's a pup growing way over here, which is kind of cool. I did just water these to help aid in replanting, but what I've noticed is this plant is getting big enough now that I need to transplant it to a different mount. And I think what I'm going to use is an old wire grate, just to use something, you know, reuse something. I will say, I grow these outdoors here in Hawaii. Now, here in Hawaii is a really great environment to grow Platycerium. The caveat being, some of these species can actually get out of hand and become invasive. So you want to be careful with that. Obviously, I wouldn't be letting these spores go anywhere they want, but I do have an auntie right now that has a Platycerium, I think it's bifurcatum for sure, that is easily 3.5 feet tall, maybe 2.5 feet wide, and several, maybe 1.5 feet deep. It's huge, and she's actually growing it in a pot, which is funny because it's definitely not epiphytically mounted, but the way that it has grown has actually shifted the growth point from a horizontal plane to more of a vertical plane. So even though it's in a pot, it is now upright, and it's just really, really impressive. I don't think I have a picture. If I do, I'll post one, but I don't think I do. So the other thing I'll note here is, because I grow these outdoors and it gets a lot of UV exposure, monofilament, which is a very great tool to use when you're mounting your Platycerium or epiphytic plants, gets really brittle when exposed to UV rays over a long period of time. So that's what's happening here. This fishing line is very, very brittle. And so I ended up switching over to a spider wire, which has UV inhibitors in it, and it lasts longer. And it also, when fishing line does get exposed to UV, it goes from translucent to kind of a white frosted color, so it's more noticeable. Whereas the spider wire, if you get it in green and everything else turns green, then it's less noticeable. So I won't be using monofilament or fluorocarbon, and the drawback with that is that fluorocarbon and monofilament have a little bit of a stretch, so you can actually get kind of a nice tight feel to it without cutting anything off. The plant can kind of swell and grow and kind of push on the monofilament. Spider wire really has no stretch at all in it. But if you can use spider wire in the sense that you're just a little bit goes a long way and you're just using it to keep everything together, you'll be good. Whereas with monofilament or fluorocarbon, you go kind of overboard with it and really wrap to get the shape that you want. So there's some drawbacks and there's some advantages to using both. But in my case, I won't be using it just because of the amount of UV that we get. So this is Platycerium bifurcatum. What we're going to do is we're going to cut away this the old monofilament for now, using my trusty Leatherman. And I'm thinking, because the wire grate that I have is pretty big, I may end up splitting these off and making 3 different plants. We'll see. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I kind of want to keep it on one mount though. but we'll see. And the other disadvantage with monofilament is that it is definitely not biodegradable. So it's probably something I'm not going to be using at all anymore for my epiphytic mounts, especially my Platycerium mounts. So maybe what I will do is, let's see. Okay, so what I have to do is I'm going to have to split this, because what's happened now is as the basal fronds have grown over the monofilament, they've been trapped and the roots have grown throughout the matrix that I created when I wrapped the original plant. So I think what I'll do is maybe I'll get this whole thing out of the coconut shell first. That's what I'll do. Oh, wow. So I like using coconut shell. It's nice, rigid. You can get it wet and it dries really well. It doesn't rot as quickly as others. Other things that you might use. So I don't want to do that. All right. Okay. So there's that. There's the coconut shell that I used. I drilled a hole up here to mount it, and then I drilled a couple other holes so that I could use as anchor points. And this was free, and you can definitely reuse that again if you wanted to. Put that over there for now. Okay. And then what do we have here is, this is the inside lining of the coconut. And it looks like all the fern roots have adhered to it and kind of pulled it away. Now, I do remember when I planted this, I used a very airy, kind of an aeroid mix in here that is mostly, looks like perlite and tree fern with some compost, and then I topped it, creating the shape with the sphagnum moss. I don't necessarily like using straight sphagnum moss when it's outdoors because it does tend to degrade a little bit faster, but in this case, it's okay. When it comes to repotting, you typically want to repot or replant your Platycerium when it's doubled in size. That's a really good metric to use on when you should decide to repot. That's actually better than I thought. So all of this, unfortunately, is going to have to get disposed of. You can't recycle it. You definitely don't want to throw it away in your typical just throw it away and forget it, because this is going to get trapped in a lot of different wildlife scenarios. So what I'll end up doing is probably just holding on to this, saving up quite a bit, and maybe possibly melting it down, and then sounds like a pain in the butt, but it's not too bad. So, okay. When it comes to watering this particular species, they tend to like, well, most Platycerium definitely like a wet-dry cycle, a definitive wet and a definitive dry between, or for your watering cycle. This guy's no different. However, they don't want to dry out too much between waterings. Other species definitely like to be drier for longer periods of time, but this guy, I would say, as soon as he becomes 90% dry, I will do the dip and soak method if it hasn't been raining. The dip and soak method is really easy to use. You can use a liquid fertilizer when you do that, and you're just going to soak for 15 to 20 minutes and then let it air dry. One thing that you really need for Platycerium that can be an issue in greenhouses is airflow. So they really need to dry out, especially the fronds. They need to completely dry out, I would say within a couple hours before any issues could occur. So here we have trade winds. It's great. It's, like I said, it's beautiful conditions to growing Platycerium. And so with that being said, just make sure that you do the soak method and then let it air dry. Fans or whatever you need to. If you're doing inside, let it air dry, and then if you don't have a lot of airflow, maybe maybe a fan or something, but I don't have that issue. And then yeah, just a weak fertilizer should do the trick, and this thing should start to put on, I think it's going to double in size by the end of the year once I remount it. The issue with having a coconut shell is that it's restrictive in growth. It's great for holding everything together, but when these big guys start to get bigger, they need to push out a little bit, and yeah, I think the way I'm going to mount it, which I'll show you here in a second, is going to be really good. And then the only other note I want to say is pests. The only pests I've had on any of my Platycerium besides snails, which just, oh, they drive me nuts, are mealybugs. mealybugs for sure I have issues with. So some species, for most of my plants, I'll end up putting a little bit of a systemic in here near the top, and then I'll cover it with, I'll put it right up here, and then I'll cover it with some moss. And then as I water it, gravity's going to pull the water down, and it's going to pull the systemic through as well, and kind of make sure that the roots have access to that systemic. And that has really saved me. Typically systemics, especially the bone-eyed, lasts about 4 months, and you'll know about that 3.5 month mark. You'll start to see mealies pop up, and you're thinking, got to redo the systemic. Other than that, you can do a slow release fertilizer in the same fashion, same pocket that you do the bone-eyed systemic in, or any systemic, and that works really, really well. Okay, so what I'm going to use to mount the Platycerium bifurcatum is this. This is an enamel-coated wire grate that I got off of an old fridge, and it's in perfect use. I mean, I kind of sound like a hoarder or whatever, but this is going to do a really, really good job at holding the weight of a very large Platycerium, being long-term use, something I can dunk in water and not have to worry about rust or anything like that. And then this is the second idea, or second way we can use the coconut. So this is coconut mesh that you can get from like Home Depot or whatever. It's usually lining like a hanging basket or whatever. But this is going to be a great way to do two things. I'm gonna line the wire grate itself first, and that allows it to be a little bit more visually appealing, I think. But it also allows me to put some medium on here without it falling through the grates. And then I'm gonna take the top piece, and what I've done is I've kind of pulled it and kind of loosened it. And then I've gone through and I've cut little slits in here, and that will allow me to create a ball on top here and get that shape that I want and hold everything in, and it's still porous enough that the roots can get through, and it doesn't break down very quickly, and that's what I really like about this kind of stuff. You want to make sure that you're getting plants that are low in salt. This has been outside getting hit with rain, and it's definitely been flushed numerous times. So I'm going to hurry and get this guy mounted to the grate, and then we'll start from there. Okay, so here it is, all ready to go, mounted on there pretty firmly. And then I'm going to put on my moss pole mix here that I've added a little bit of pond to just kind of help with aeration. And then we'll amend it with some a systemic and also a slow release fertilizer. But this is the mixture that I'm going to use. It's a mixture of moss, it's a mixture of cocoa chunk, it's got tree fern fiber in there, and then like I said, it also has some of the homemade pond mix. So this guy is going to get mounted, I believe, something like this. All right, the little hooks there on the side, whatever, I'm not going to cut those off. But I'm going to kind of plant it low on here just because it'd be kind of cool to get this whole grill covered by the plant when that happens, because it's not the most aesthetically pleasing, but it is definitely a viable option. Like I said, we're going to kind of mound this right here, and because he is kind of oppositely shaped, he's curving this way, and we kind of want to make a mound that's going this way. We are going to place him on there, put on that top cover of the cocoa sheet, and then we'll kind of maybe that will actually work. That'll be good. Maybe what we'll do is, instead of making this a full mound, we'll create a little divot to fit in the existing shape that we're working with. Okay, this is working out well. The side's going here. Okay, let's do a little bit more like that. Now, bifurcatum, like I said earlier, can get to some pretty impressive size. Now what we'll do is we'll put this guy on top, and we'll create that little divot that I was talking about earlier. Like that. There we go. And then that was going to be our typical shape that we're going to work with here. And then we're going to put this guy right on top. There we go. And then we are going to basically tie one piece of the string to one corner of the grill and then just start crisscrossing our way through. These hooks actually are going to come in handy because we're going to use those for some anchor points. So it actually worked out. There's a lot of good videos on YouTube that will show you a much more in-depth way of doing this. But basically you just want to make sure that you're securing the plant long enough that the plant has a chance to root into the medium, and then you'll be fine. Okay, so I did backfill in those gaps with some moss and some moss pole filling, or medium rather, and any freshly mounted Platycerium is always going to look a little worse for wear because it's not, you know, its final state. But as the plant matures and grows and starts to put those shield fronds over what are obvious anchor points, it will look a lot better. Some people are a lot better at making a final product look, I mean, tip-top shape, but this is going to be a little bit harder to do in this scenario, but it will work out just fine. So I'm going to finish sewing off the outer edges of that envelope that I made, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay guys, here it is. This is it fully mounted, and I think it does look really good on there, especially with that nice background, that brown background. I think it'll be a much better long-term solution here, and it's definitely going to double in size. I'm going to say within the year, and then I'll have to mount it again, but for now that will work out just well, and it's just another mounting idea you can use with a you know, something durable like this grate, and yeah, I think it looks pretty good. So we're going to move on to the next one. Okay, so the next one that we're going to work on is a pretty easygoing one. Some people kind of classify it as a more difficult Platycerium, but I haven't had that experience at all. And the thing is they love water. So the more water on this guy, the better as far as root rot goes. You know, you still run the risk. You definitely want to do a dry wet cycle, but you can kind of let it dry out a little bit less than you would some of the other ones. And this is Platycerium elephantotis. This guy is an African species, a beautiful species. I'm going to show you this guy. This is a pup off of the main mother plant that I had, and it is growing inside a coconut shell as well. That's much bigger, much deeper. It's growing really, really well. You can start off a lot of Platycerium in a normal pot, in a normal soil mix, if you will, and they'll grow fine that way, but eventually you're going to want to switch them from this horizontal plane to a vertical plane. And so this guy is growing near the Hoyas, kind of in a little bit less sun exposure than the bifurcatum, by the way. This is bright indirect light, but I would say even bright, a little bit less light than that serves this guy really well. Although it can tolerate bright indirect light and even some morning sun, some late afternoon sun. So you can see here, these are the shield fronds, and they're called elephantotis because they can get huge. I mean, 4 feet wide, something like 6 feet tall, really big African elephant bull-like ears, or bull elephant-like ears, and a really, really cool species. So just wanted to showcase this real quick. This is me growing it inside the coconut shell with some sphagnum moss. Behind the sphagnum moss is that same mix of the moss pole, and then just a little wire hook to hang it. Working our way up, this is another pup from that same mother plant, which we'll get to, kind of mounted on a little bit different mount. This is some driftwood that I used against a cedar plank, and I just have it against a fence, but there isn't a ton of moss on here, so it doesn't have a lot to root into, but it's growing pretty well. But when I first planted this guy in here, it was just a teeny little plant. In fact, we have some right here that you can see that I'm working with, just little guys, and they're actually all over in here, and so those will eventually grow into full-on plants. But you can see this is the monofilament line that is actually starting to become fragile and break off and brittle, and it's one of the reasons why I don't like to use filament, monofilament or fluorocarbon, because it does degrade over time. And I have gone through since then and used a braided wire, and that's what's holding this plant on here. And because these plants love moisture, I have to wet this guy down every day if it's not raining. And so he is going to get moved to his own little piece that I think will be much better. I'm trying to decide what I'm going to put him on. I might have decided to use this coconut, so it's definitely deeper than the bifurcatum one, You can see as far as depth goes, so this will work out much better, and he'll be happier. So elephantotis has some really beautiful veination, and I hope you guys can see that. Really beautiful. You can kind of see behind here, this is where the part of the plant that collects a bunch of debris, and that's also where I'll feed a slow release fertilizer, and that's a more natural way of doing things. And you can imagine this is also a natural way of mounting a fern, because they do grow on limbs of trees. They don't always grow on the trunk. A lot of time they're actually out on these big long limbs and growing that way, sometimes in a crotch, sometimes not, but this is a really good way of doing it. But I'm trying to see how we're going to cut him free, because he is kind of really in there. So I'm trying to think if I can. No. So we're going to have to just dismantle this whole thing, and the smaller ones I'll try to save off camera here. One other pest I noticed that we get a lot here is ants. They're not necessarily a pest, the ants themselves, but they farm aphids, and so if you get ants, you're guaranteed you're going to get aphids. So it's this constant battle with non-invasive ants, or invasive ants, non-native ants. Most of the species we have here that are not native, which is most of the ant species we have, are super colonies. So normally an ant colony has one queen, and it comes in contact with another colony, and that colony has a separate queen, and they battle it out. Super colonies, though, have multiple queens, and what's crazy is you can take, let's say here in Hawaii, on Kaua'i, you have an ant colony, and you take that ant colony and you go to a different island, or you go to wherever these ants are originally from, and you put them with another colony. Instead of battling, they recognize each other and they grow and become one colony. And so it's really difficult. You know, on my piece of property, if we were to destroy all the colonies here on the property, the colonies on my neighbor's property would just move into the vacant lot, and that's the issue that we have. It's just this non-stop battle with ants, and they're always in the plants, and they're farming, and it's just a pain in the butt. One of the drawbacks of living in a tropical or semi-tropical place, subtropical place, really. Okay. Like in here, there's a ton of ants. There's a lot of frass, which is insect poop, which I guess the plants enjoy. I would think they would, being a fertilizer. You know, some Platycerium in the wild actually live with ant species, and it's a symbiotic relationship, which I have one of those species, and we'll get into that guy here in a little bit. But yeah, this whole thing, you know what, because all the moss is going to be saved, all the little sporophytes, the little plant babies from the Platycerium are going to come with it, and they'll just grow along next to this plant. It's cool to see all the microlife in here. There's tons of millipedes, cockroaches in here, a lot of springtails. It's kind of cool to see kind of how the ecosystem grows around these plants. Well, there it is, and you can kind of see how these beautiful big fertile fronds and shield fronds kind of look like just a big old elephant head. Maybe I'll use this for like an epiphytic orchid or something, but it is a very punky wood. I'm going to use this coconut shell. I think so, even though it's going to get really big pretty quick. I think it will hold quite a bit of medium, and we'll just backfill this hollow space with the medium, and then we'll wrap it and we'll be good to go. One thing I do want to do is add a couple holes, drill a couple holes in here to hang it. Even though there's a hole right here I could kind of hang it from, I guess, but I think back here is where I'll hang it. And you really want to get it so that it's either vertically or just a little tilted back, and that will help with food acquisition. And then one other thing is, these are a rhizomatic fern, like most ferns, or if not all ferns, and so you want to make sure that where the growth point is on that rhizome is pointing vertical. You don't want to tilt these guys, because then they take extra time to right themselves, extra effort and all that. So with that being said, we're going to kind of fold it down like this and get kind of a nice little cavity right there that will mirror this. These guys you could probably keep on a semi-moist basis permanently, and you'd be okay. They tend not to rot as long as you have good aeration in there. So I got a moss pole mix. I'm going to top it off with a systemic and some slow release fertilizer, and then we'll cap it. All right, so that's ready to go. We're going to cap it off here. And what's kind of cool is all those little baby ferns that are in here, they're gonna stay with this plant and grow out, and then I'll be able to pull them off and plant them up separate. Elephantotis is a great Platycerium that pops a ton. So, okay, again, keeping in mind what is vertical, what is north, is how you need to orient this plant. Okay, so I changed my mind on how I'm going to mount it. I'm not going to use that wire hook. I'm going to just use this piece of wire right here. And what I like to do is I'll leave the wire hook kind of anchored where it is, and I can easily just pop it off, put it in a little bowl of water with some liquid fertilizer if need be, and soak it. And then this elephantotis is going to come right back. Okay, so that's elephantotis number 2. Now let me show you the mother plant. Okay, so this is my elephantotis mother plant. Now, mother plant is kind of a misnomer because it's still just a pup, but this is the pup that produced all the other pups, and it's such a small size to do it. Back here you can see those beautiful old fertile fronds that have turned brown and kind of add that nice contrast. This guy's getting really nice big broad shield fronds here. It's got another little fern growing here. Oops, sorry buddy. Got another little fern growing on the side, and then there's just a ton of leaf material growing inside here. So this guy is now also in a coconut shell, but it's outgrown it, and so I kind of want to get him into a spot where he is going to be happy long term. And so what I thought I would do, this is the third way that I like to use coconut as a planting material. So this is half of the coconut husk, okay? And actually, it's 2/3. You can see the split here, but then I just wire 2 of them together, and that will give me a lot of aeration in the back and drainage. But then inside is a nice, really big cavity that I can use to plant the ball of this guy in here. And then that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. Is it's going to be mounted like that, and I think what I'll do is I'll do the same thing. I'll wire it in just with a nice big U-shaped wire and kind of twist it in the back to kind of secure it to the back, and I won't have to use as much of the braided line. So same story, we're going to hurry and bust through this line here. You can see here, because this is not exposed to UV rays at all, it is perfectly intact. It's not frayed, it's not brittle, and so it does hold up in that regard. If this was kept inside, it might be a really good usage material, but I don't like using it, and I feel like it's pretty wasteful outdoors. And of course, we all know the harms it can cause to marine life. So we're going to cut through this without bruising the shield fronds too much. I'm not sure what broke. Oh, half the coconut broke. So this mix that I used in here had a ton of rice husks in it, and it's kind of a cool thing to see. Rice husk I like using because it's very, very lignin rich. Lignins are very hard to break down. Here's something that's really cool to see. If you look in the back, those leaves are from a jackfruit tree that have fallen in here and are doing, like here, there's a jackfruit leaf, that are breaking down and adding nutrition to the plant in a natural setting, in a natural method. So that's kind of cool. And now we're going to pull these pieces of fishing line out one by one. Yeah, I am not a fan of using fishing line. I don't think I'll be using it at all anymore. I have used like U-Y-E-W string and cordage. That broke down too quickly, so something that's pure natural fiber I don't think will last as long, but I'm definitely not going to be using that. So you can see the mix back there, And what's kind of bumming me out is with me handling it, all the trichomes, all the fuzzy hairs are rubbing off on this elephantotis frond. Sorry, bud, but it will be much happier once we mount it, and it will bounce back pretty quick. So just to go over this, like I said, is the coconut husk. This is where the coconut tree or palm would actually grow out of, would be this top. And I like to mount it upside down so that the pointed part is upward, and it gives you that nice bowl inside to use. I typically mount with just a third of the husk, and in this, wow, I don't want to show you that plant just yet, but I'll talk about that here in a little bit. Just because it gives you a nice little shelf to work with, and you can kind of pack it with some more medium. And then I've wired on a hook, and this should do the trick. So same thing as before, take our moss, pull filling here, and I'm going to pack it in. Now the nice thing with this is if this was pure sphagnum moss, you could really pack it too tightly, and that would make, we'll get into that here on the next plant, because I actually did that, and it's restricting the growth of the plant. Like that. But you can't do that with this moss pull mix. At least I don't think you can. I've really tried to pack it in there, and it's so airy. It's got a lot of stuff in there that prevents that compaction in there from happening, which is a nice safeguard. So again, we're going to hit it with a systemic and some slow release fertilizer, and I'll be right back. So I had it originally placed like this, and so when I plant it, I'm going to actually have to anchor it up back a little bit like this, just so when I go vertical with it, it is in a more natural, happier setting. I'm going to take some wire, and because there's a split in the back, I'm going to pierce the shield frond, which will be kind of a mini sacrifice, and go through one side of the coconut husk, and then anchor it again through the other side. I hate to do that, but it's going to make sure that I have the most secure anchor. So I'm just going to hurry and do it. Ugh, gosh dang it. Okay. I'm like sweating from the fact that I'm going through the shield frond. I hate it. I hate it. Oh well. But I'm going to tack a nail in on this side just to anchor it up. And then that's the plant. And this is how it's going to hang. Yep, just like this. So not as kicked back as I want, but eventually it will correct itself and go from more of a seated forward look to more of a seated back. So that is my Platycerium elephantotis, all three of the pups, and we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so our next Platycerium that we're going to be dealing with is Platycerium veitchii, and this is the cultivar Lemoinei. And what's really cool about these guys, this is a very small one, but first off, this is the Platycerium that I put on a moss mount that is just too compact, way too compact. So before we get into kind of the basics on the ecology of this plant, we're going to just puncture the root mass, if I can, with this little spike here to kind of aerate the roots. And you can just see just how tight it is. I can hear that there's a ton of roots in here though. The root mass in here is growing really well, and there's a ton of millipedes in here too, probably from the other plant. But I think by doing this, I'll be able to aerate the plant and kind of force some looseness into the mix. So this is such a cool plant. So these guys grow in Australia, and they are one of the platyceriums that prefer drier, hotter, sunnier conditions than almost any other platycerium. These guys can be found growing on boulder cliffs, rock cliffs. They can be grown in very, very arid areas. Arid in the sense that they experience drought for a few months of the year, upwards of 3 months per year. And they develop really, really thick trichomes, super dense white trichomes that help protect against water loss and then UV damage from the sun exposure. They really prefer a lot of sun, a lot of heat, upwards of 100 degrees. So in the summertime, this guy is loving it. So I've read reports of these guys being found in shadier areas, and those plants were leggier looking. They didn't produce as much sari or much fertile patches on their fronds. And then when they were moved to a much sunnier location, a much higher light location, then they developed that typical look. So these guys are related to bifurcatum again. It's one of the bifurcatum clade, but they're unique in the sense that they have the higher amount of trichomes, their affinity towards hotter, drier conditions, and again, it's a really cool plant, very slow growing. The shield fronds on these are really highly veined, which is beautiful, and then of course the fertile fronds have really nice thick trichomes. I think that this mount is still good. You can see that I used a natural fiber twine on this, and it is breaking apart, but because the root mass has grown throughout the moss, it's actually holding on just fine. It's being kept on a piece of driftwood that I just put a piece of wire through to hang it, and it just hangs next to the succulents up front and gets full exposure to the western sun, along with the bifurcatum and along with the next plant that I'm going to go over, which I was kind of surprised that it could take as much sun as it does the next plant. Not surprised at all on the veitchii. So that's Platycerium veitchii, and Lemoinei is the variant or the subspecies on this. What I understand is that the original veitchii has a lot more silver, a lot more white, especially to the fertile fronds, to the sari patches, whereas the Lemoinei is a little bit greener in look, and you can kind of see that this is more of a sage kind of look-alike rather than a pure white plant, maybe like a lamb's ear, mainly to the fertile fronds that the white trichomes give the veitchii, the original veitchii, the more white look. But I still really like this. A very common plant, you can get it almost anywhere. This guy was like 10 bucks. Hasn't pupped for me at all, and it definitely took some time to grow into this mount, and I really think it's just because I packed that sphagnum moss too tight. If I would have used my current moss mix, I think it would be just fine, but because this plant is slower growing, and I think just by aerating the moss, it should be just fine. So we'll move on to the next guy. All right guys, so this was a dream plant of mine for a very long time. If you can't recognize what this is Platycerium ridleyi. It's one of the smaller platyceriums, and it's found throughout Malaysia, and it is a beautiful platycerium, highly sought after. It was super expensive at the height of the plant boom there, and so I got this guy off of eBay as a rescue pup, and it's definitely had its share of recovery. I misunderstood where the rhizome growth tip was, and I actually planted it cocked a little bit, so it's actually had to rotate up, and I don't know if you can kind of see that right here, but it kind of takes a dip up. And there's many different varieties of ridleyi. This is, I guess, your standard. There's a wide form, there's a miniature form, and the shield fronds on these are very cool. They're kind of textured in a way that reminds you of like madagascariense. Yeah, these guys, once they start to grow and start to pop off and they form these little mini colonies, they look so good. And if you can see pictures of them in the wild, it's a treat. It's so cool. For some reason, this shield frond was growing down, and now it's kind of lipping out and it's cupping right here. But like most Platycerium, eventually it will correct itself and start to look good. A lot of people just don't have the patience, so they'll remount it, but I have the patience. I kind of want to let the plant do its thing, and eventually these shield fronds will start to encase this whole thing. I had a neighbor come over, an old Japanese neighbor come over, and said it looks like a rooster. So every time I see it now, I kind of see a rooster. Here's its tail. Maybe that's the head, and these are the legs. I'm not too sure. I have a hard time seeing it once in a while, but this guy did get hit hard with mealybugs, and because there's all these little tight areas of growth, I didn't realize what was going on. I could tell there was declining growth, but I couldn't tell why exactly, and I wasn't using the systemic on this, and I'm glad that what happened is there was a fertile frond right here, and it died back, and inside was just encased like a skin of white fuzzy mealybugs. And of course there was a ton of ants going to and fro. Should have cued me off, but I just wasn't clearly understanding the cues that they were farming a ton of mealybugs in here. So I hosed it out and did a systemic on it up here along with some slow-release fertilizer, and it has since started to come back. And what's really cool is this ridleyi is starting to produce a fertile frond right here. So that dark patch is what's known as sori, S-O-R-I, and sori are the patches of spores that ferns reproduce with, and eventually when this guy does drop the spores through the sori patches, it's quite a sight, and they're really easy to grow. You can actually find spores from ridleyi on eBay, I think for like 25 bucks maybe. Super easy to grow. They do take a long time to go from spore growth through the different variations that the spores go through before they reach a more mature fern. I think it's upwards of 5 years before you even get anywhere close to something like this. This plant is far from its peak as far as beautifulness and maturity, but it is getting there, and it has been a really cool journey to go through. Ridleyi, they do like a wet-dry cycle like other Platycerium, but they tend to like the madagascariense, a little bit less dry period before their next drench, but they don't like it as wet, in my experience, as the elephantotis. So definitely keep that in mind. This guy will let you know when it's thirsty. It will wilt a little bit, but I tend to not let it get to that point before I water again. Even with all the rain we've had, it has been doing great. And this is one of those species that needs high humidity. I would say 50-60% as your ambient, and then increase that as you go. It does do really well with the soak method, and it is a pretty heavy feeder as far as ferns go. I've noticed that it will readily enjoys and reflects the amount of feeding that I give it. It's not too heavy, but it is already starting to give us a fertile frond here, which I think is so cool. This is my first fertile frond on this ridleyi, and I think I really am excited for that. There is a wide form, and I actually prefer this more natural form. The wide form is cool and all, but I really enjoy just how cool this is. Now, one thing to note too is that a lot of Platycerium, their fertile fronds grow down and kind of create a curtain. Ridleyi kind of has an exception that it grows upwards, those fertile fronds, so it creates a really cool look to it. A lot of Platycerium, their shield fronds will actually grow upward, whereas these guys, it's their fertile fronds that grow upward. So you can always kind of recognize a ridleyi based on its upward vertical growth on the fertile fronds. And as far as difficulty goes, it's right in the middle. Some people have difficulty, and I'm going to chalk that up to low humidity, but I haven't had any issues, and this plant has come close to death several times just by the means of me getting it through the mail as a rescue. It was being grown in a netted pot, and then the mealybugs. I mean, it was the most amount of mealybugs I've ever seen on a plant in my collection, with the exception of maybe pepper plants or something that's on the tail end of its growth. So anyway, I can't wait for more updates on this. I think in a year's time, this thing is going to be just perfect. So Platycerium ridleyi, a freaking cool Platycerium, definitely worth the trouble. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so here's our next one. This is Platycerium willinckii. And willinckii are so cool because there's so many different varieties out there of willinckii. It's kind of amazing. This is kind of like your venture into high-end Platycerium for sure, and it's usually a type of willinckii that is kind of catching the higher prices, fetching the higher prices. So willinckii is sometimes known as the Javan Platycerium, the Javan staghorn. You can see here that the fertile fronds are actually growing down, as opposed to the bifurcatum, which were going up at first, but then they'll eventually start to drop down. These grow down, and then the shield fronds actually form a very distinct funnel, and this is what will capture a lot of the food for the plant near the top. This was a very cool import. I'll put the name right here, Tropic Flora. Very cool. I loved dealing with them. There's a little bit of yellowing from this fresh import. I'd say we're about a month in, and I am going to keep it on this plastic backing. So there's another way you can actually mount these guys. This is a plastic pegboard that they've cut to size, or that they've ordered specifically for this, and then they've just wired in the back. Definitely responds well to being dunked, and it does not want to be dry at all. So you definitely want to keep this guy semi-moist between its waterings, and it will reward you with some really cool funky growth. There's always this uniqueness to the shield fronds, and the fertile fronds themselves the fertile fronds themselves are definitely going to be kind of cool and unique, kind of look like mittens. And then you can see the growth point right there in the center, that it's kicking out some new growth, and it has a ton of trichomes on it too. So anyway, Platycerium willinckii. We're going to go into another Platycerium willinckii variant, and it's kind of the rarest or the most expensive Platycerium that I have on the table or in the collection. And it's another willinckii, but it's actually a dwarf variety. So this is Platycerium willinckii bacteria. And they get, I mean, some variants will get 3 inches max, full grown, just very, very small. There's also another variety called Jade Girl. That's a really small plant. I got this guy from a Carnivero auction. Carnivero, they just do amazing things. I mounted it on that third husk of a coconut that I like to do. So this is what the third of it looks like, because typically the husk will split into 3 parts pretty readily, and then you can use it to mount. So again, that's where the plant would come out, the palm would come out like this, and the root would come out the same side. But I like to flip it upside down and mount it this way. This guy is very fresh import, but I can't wait to see it put on some new growth. Very, very cool. This is willinckii bacteria. Very cool, very high end. Very, very pretty. So let's move on to what I think is a more difficult plant to keep, but I still think very doable by most growers if you have the humidity. And that is, this is also a dream plant I've had for a lot of years, and this has such a cool ecology. This is Platycerium. Let's see if you guys can guess. Looks very close, similar to ridleyi as far as the shield fronds go. This is madagascariense. So obviously it comes from Madagascar, and this plant has such a cool ecology. So it does not grow in a way that collects debris from falling leaves or from debris. This has formed a symbiotic relationship with a native ant. Now obviously we don't have any ants here that are going to help fertilize it, but how they grow is the shield fronds create these veins, and inside the veins they're raised, so it gives a very 3D texture of valleys and tunnels and textures, and the ants live inside those tunnels. And of course, just ants being ants, collecting food and creating waste, the Platycerium takes advantage of that and uses that as fertilizer. So it's a very, very cool way of doing things. This was also the Tropic Flora import. Very cool plant. It's been on my wish list for a long time. They're just incredibly expensive, but this was such a good deal that I couldn't pass it up. It was definitely about half the price of what you normally pay. It is starting to produce a fertile frond here, and like ridleyi, the fertile fronds on these are vertical for a little bit, and then they start to drape down. I did just water this guy today, but yeah, I can't wait for this thing to encase the whole thing and just continue getting bigger and bigger. Now again, I'll do the same rule. Once this doubles in size, I'll probably rehouse it back on the same plaque, because it is pretty big plaque. It's that corrugated pegboard, or not corrugated, it's that plastic pegboard. And then just create the moss ball that's a little bit bigger. But they're using wire again, which I think is a great idea. And I'll probably use a similar wire to this. Has great veination to it. And it is one of the smaller Platycerium as well. I think it's on par with ridleyi. It might actually get a little bit bigger than ridleyi. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the small to medium sized Platycerium. This guy does need a lot of humidity, so it's one of those that if you're struggling with it, bump up the humidity, but it needs aeration, or ventilation rather. So if you are having issues with this in a greenhouse, it's more than likely not humidity. At that point, it's more than likely the airflow. So bump a fan on it or whatever the case may be. For those of you who don't have a greenhouse but you're living in a more arid environment, you're going to have to do the veitchii for sure. The veitchii, the super bum, and the bifurcatum would do great for you, with the veitchii being more so. But if you have some sort of higher humidity, this guy is your guy, because they do thrive in higher humidity. But it's starting to produce a new fertile frond, and I can't wait to keep going. So we have one more Platycerium. This guy can be really, really difficult to grow, and before I show it to you, I'm going to be doing it on a plank of wood, just your everyday Platycerium mount. I am going to use the coconut fiber mat and use it as kind of like a little pocket here, and that's going to hold in the material, and then I'll string it using 2 nails that I've hammered in the side as anchor points, and then I'll just hang it from here, and I think that will be good. So this is known as the butterfly Platycerium, or Platycerium wallichii, and you can see I love how it grows this crown of shield fronds. They grow vertical, they create that funnel. It's very easy to put food down in there and feed this plant, and then it has this really cool bifurcation to the fertile fronds. For some reason, willinckii gets confused with wallichii a lot, but wallichii is just so much more difficult to grow because they go through these seasonal dormancies, and in those seasonal dormancies, if you don't plant it correctly and if you don't water correctly, they may never come out of that dormancy, and they may rot during that dormancy. Some wallichii, well, like here, we don't really get too cold, so I doubt that this plant is going to go into a full-on dormancy, but I'll be very cognizant of if it does start to go back in growth, and I'll cut back on watering without too much, without harming the plant. Too little water and the plant may never come back out of it. Too much water, it might rot. So it's just one of those that are, you got to pay attention to the watering cycle a lot more so than almost any other Platycerium. Some of these guys have been kept in collections for a long, long time, and then they just all of a sudden rot away. No one knows. They were going great for a long time. I'm hoping that's not the case for me. I love the wallichii. It's a very beautiful one, and this is the last one that we're going to mount because that completes my Platycerium collection. So without further ado, let us start to unwind the wire backing right here. All right. Okay. So now he's going to separate. Obviously, the nice thing with this plastic pegboard is I can reuse it for some other plants, some orchids, whatever the case may be. I can cut it down, but I like that I can reuse that without having to create waste. Okay, so it did cut into the root ball a little bit, not severely, just made an indentation, which I don't like. And this guy will definitely let you know when he's thirsty. I've been dipping him every day because the root ball is so small, and these leaves will shrivel and then spread out again when they've been hydrated, which is why I'm going to end up putting it on the board here. So again, I'm going to kind of put it, well, maybe midway like that. And what we'll do is we'll put this this guy up front like this, like I said, to create a pocket. And we'll fill that pocket with medium. And I'll create a little step system. So it's flatter right here, because that's where the root ball is going to go, and then I'll kind of kick it out right here. And I think they're so freaking pretty. We'll go like that. How's that look? I think that looks really good. And then what I'll do is I'll wind the bottom really well to kind of seal it in so that this piece of cocoa mat doesn't go anywhere. But real quick, what I'm going to do is just keep going back and forth around the heads of the screw or the nails to really anchor it in. Try to get this in frame here for you guys. Like this. Okay guys, here it is, all completed. So I did put some medium up here in the crown. I put some slow-release fertilizer. I kind of backfilled this gap right here, and I think that looks pretty good. Give you kind of an upfront view here. Now once this thing, like I said, settles in and starts to produce more growth, it will cover this, even though this doesn't really look that bad. I'm using a piece of pine wood, so the pine wood will last quite a while. Of course, I am going to upsize this once it does reach double its size, and I can't wait for its first shield frond once it produces it. So thanks for joining on this cool episode that we talked about my Platycerium. Leave a comment, tell me what your Platyceriums that you're keeping are, what your favorite is, what your dream Platycerium is. It would be kind of cool to get a Platycerium willinckii jade girl to go along with the bacteria. It would be really cool to get that bacteria huge and to show you a mature bacteria. They're not very common here in the States, but they are becoming more common. Leave a comment, give a thumbs up, subscribe, and until next time, we'll see you guys on the next adventure. It's real tight up in here to secure it, up in here, and